What's up, my beautiful YouTube family? I'm just sitting here petting my pet 30-pound crystal. It's exhausting. But hey, enough about that. Let's cut the crap to what we're doing today. This is episode 4 of my podcast, the Awaken with JP Sears show. I named it after myself. Now, this is a very special episode because I'm broadcasting it on YouTube. This is something I'm currently not doing with my normal episodes. Normally, they're just audio. But I wanted to bring this to you on YouTube because I have a super freaking special guest. So here's my super freaking special guest. His name is Paul Selig. Now, Paul is absolutely weird, and I mean that in the best possible way. Paul channels. He makes connections with what he calls his guides, and he is very gifted. And he also makes connections with other people. Now, a couple of things I want to say about that. Some of you might say, well, JP, I'm ultra spiritual, so of course he does that. And others of us would say yeah, right, he does that. Sounds like a bunch of crap. I want to say, first off, for me, I'm typically incredibly skeptical anytime someone talks about hey bro, I've got an awesome gift. I talk to angels or other beings. It's kind of yeah, the language of talk, it doesn't mean much to me. But when I see it in action and I have a genuine feeling within myself of that person is very genuine, then my skepticism can surrender. That's exactly what it does with Paul Selig. I've had a chance to get to know him, and he's done readings on me and also listening to what just feels like profound truth that he speaks while he's channeling. I just, my opinion is I think this guy is incredibly for real. However, as you dive into this very awesomely weird podcast, I'm going to ask you to consider don't worry about keeping your mind small, trying to figure out is he for real? Is he not for real? Is he for real? Is he not for real? I think if you try to find that agreement, disagreement little landscape within your mind, if you stay there, you will miss some profound gifts that Paul delivers during this podcast. Now, I want to share a couple things. When Paul channels, when he does what he calls connects with his guides, it sounds weird. You'll hear him repeat things super freaking fast, and then he'll slow it down and say it audibly. That's what he does when he's channeling. So it sounds weird, and it's kind of a cool show too. So just know that's him when he's channeling. Now, I want to share with you my favorite part of this podcast is when Paul did a reading on me. Now, it was pretty scary because before the podcast, I asked Paul, hey, would you be willing to do that? And he said, I'd be happy to do a reading for you. And I said, well, on the air with the podcast? He said, yes, JP, if you're ready, just know I pull no punches. You might not like what you hear. So Paul did a reading on me, brought up specific challenges that I'm working on, and challenges within myself and my relationship with Amber. My beautiful wife Amber was sitting right there during the recording of this. So, man, my palms were sweating. But what Paul brought up, it was very profound and meaningful and felt very on target for me. So I'm thrilled to have that be part of this conversation. So without further ado, please open your mind, your hearts, your third eyes, all your chakras, all the things, and give it up for my amazing guest, Paul Selig. Paul, I am honored to have you on and to be talking with you, my friend, for many reasons, but welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. It'd be funny if you were very ungrateful about being on.
I hate going anywhere, but
yes.
We'll do what we can.
Thank you for coming on the show with all your resentment and having the facade of a beautiful smile on your face. Well, Paul, there's, I think, 2 things about you that fascinate me. I'm sure there's others, but coming from the outside looking in, 2 really fascinate me. One would be the message from the guides, which in my experience is a very clear, clean message. I get this sensation of typically my ego being pretty undefended, though scared and challenged at times, but also of the sensation of I'm remembering what I already know.
Yeah.
when I'm hearing the message that comes through you from the guides. And then the other component that I'm fascinated about is you, the person, the personality, and how you work with this gift. I don't know if you call it a gift, and how your relationship with it. So if we start there, could I ask, how did you come to be a channeler? I mean, I doubt it was like a online course you saw advertised on Facebook, like 3 easy steps to tap into the cosmos. So what's the story on that?
It wasn't planned. I wasn't somebody who necessarily even believed in channeling. I was raised pretty much an atheist. When I was 25, I hit a real wall in my life, and I found myself out of sheer necessity, not because I thought it would be nice to get spiritual, praying for some kind of direction and help. And I heard a voice telling me to get my act together, and I listened to it, which was the very first one. And so suddenly I went from living in a world where there was no such thing as, God or spirit or whatever you want to call it, into one, in which perhaps there was. And I was beginning to think, well, maybe there was. And I had an experience when I was, 25, shortly thereafter, where I heard there was this thing happening called the harmonic convergence, and people are going to be waking up. And I thought, well, if there is a God or something like a God, and, you asked to wake up, why would it want to say no? I mean, why? It made no sense to me. So I went up to the roof of the building that I lived in the night before this event with a crystal and a mantra, because I thought you needed the props. And I asked to be woken up. And, and I always say this, every time I tell this story, that, for all I know, I may have been hyperventilating, but I had something of an experience. And, it was an experience of energy, or what I now know is energy, moving through my body, from sort of the base of my being up, and out through the top of my head. And, the mantra, it turned out, was a Kundalini mantra. I didn't know what Kundalini was at the time. And, I had no idea. And I don't know that that's happened. That's what happened. People said it sounded like a spontaneous Kundalini awakening or a Shakti power, all these different names. And I don't know if they even matter. But for me, it was an experience of something palpable. And I think, given who I was and, what I had come from, I was a year out of graduate school at Yale. I was the least likely candidate for something like this that I could have thought of. I had platinum blonde Billy Idol hair. I had hair, I've been a really hard partier, and now I was there up on this roof, rocking in this energy. And then I started seeing little lights around people. And then I ended up going to a healer to get a context of that, for that energy healing. And then I got the courage to study healing myself. And I volunteered. They called me to volunteer at this place in New York that was providing services for people with life-challenging illness. It was the height of the AIDS epidemic in New York City. It was a messy, awful, awful time. And I found that when I had my hands on people's bodies, I started to hear things for them. It was really simple. So if I had my hands on your chest and I heard the name Fred, I learned to say, who's Fred? And you might say, my father, my son, my lover, my dog. And as that kept getting confirmed, I started to trust what was coming through. And I decided to have a little group that met in my apartment every week, to mostly do, the energy work that I had been taught by my teacher. And the very first group I started to hear things to say to the group. So it was the beginning of channeling. But that went on for 18 years in my living room, with, 5 people, 13 people showing up. I wasn't looking to be known for this. I was teaching college, through this time, and running a graduate program. And I was very, very under the radar. But I had been a heavy smoker through most of this time. And in 2008, I quit smoking. And the moment I did, the guides began lecturing through me, which was quite something. And I just knew that I was talking more. And then I became willing to record the lectures, which I had been unwilling to do because I didn't want to hear myself channel and I didn't want a record of it. But once I began to record and transcribe, the guides announced that they had a book to write. And now they've dictated 7 books through me. 6 are in print. The 6th is coming out soon. The 7th was just completed, the dictation. And now these books, which are the unedited transcripts of the sessions, I don't fix anything and go back and change them. It's just what the transcriptionist puts on the page now is what the book is off the recording. Those are the teachings that my guides bring through. And that's the process. So really what I perceive myself as doing is taking dictation. I don't think it's very glamorous or spiritual or any of those things. It's a form of hearing, clairaudience, that I seem to have developed. But that was the long answer to a short question. I hope that was okay.
It was not, Paul. I'd like to publicly shame you.
Okay.
That was beautiful, my friend. And I'm actually... That brings up a question I have maybe about your ego personality, Paul. When you're taking dictation, I mean, I would consider that to be a great service that you're doing. You're allowing yourself to be the messenger of a message greater than yourself. And is that challenging for your ego in a I'm not gratifying myself kind of thing?
Well, my name appears on the cover of all of these books that I didn't write. And that's an odd feeling. So when people say, I've really been moved or my life has been changed by your work, I go, thank you very much. And I don't want to dismiss that. Yeah. And I don't want to denigrate my role in this. I don't know that these books could have come through if I hadn't been willing to sit in the chair and receive the information publicly, but it's a very uneasy relationship to it. I mean, I can be a cynic or a skeptic around this stuff still, and I'm challenged by it. And my idea of who I am and how the world works is continually challenged by it. I mean, as I say sometimes, I sit in a chair, I close my eyes, and this is when they're working with a group usually, or really almost any time that they're going to work. I'll hear one phrase repeated incessantly in my head, like, they need to hear, they need to hear, they need to hear. And when I keep hearing they need to hear until I say they need to hear. The moment I say they need to hear, the rest of it just floods out nonstop, phrase after phrase after phrase after phrase after. And so I'm so busy keeping up with the phrases without knowing how they necessarily connect, or if there's an overriding theme, or I feel it, I'm half hearing it as it's coming through. I'm present for it, I'm a conscious channel, but I'm not directing it. So I suppose the challenge is that it's happening with me and through me, and I get it at the level that I can get it. But I don't call myself a spiritual teacher, and I certainly don't call myself a guru. I can't imagine anything worse than that. But I am fascinated by this still. When I was a writer when I was younger, and I had the worst writer's block of anybody I've met. I was awful. It was humiliating. And the fact that I literally closed my eyes, and the first book was dictated over the course of 2.5 weeks. The last one took a few months, but I was only channeling on weekends pretty much, and on whenever I had and Wednesday nights, because that's when there was an audience, and the book was delivered entirely before students, and then recorded. So there's now a visual record of the dictation of the last few books, which I'm pleased about. There's always been an audio record because they've always been transcribed. So I'm participatory to the adventure, but I don't experience myself as the one leading the adventure. Yeah. You know what I mean? Like I'm on safari with somebody else.
Yeah. And how do you, my language on that, here's the question. How do you keep your ego in check? In a little context, like we all know about the creepy guru status, where maybe the creepy guru, let's pretend that's an actual archetype. Mm-hmm. The creepy guru maybe starts off with a great message, maybe a clean message, but the ego does as the ego will do. Yeah. And, before too long, along with the great messages, also like, oh yeah, and by the way, sleeping with the leader will kind of get you bigger status in the afterlife or whatever that is. And yeah, the hunger for power that I believe all human egos have, how do you keep that in check?
Well, I mean, I'm very clear to make a big distinction between me and the guides that I work with. That's the first thing. So I'm human. I have my failings. I'm just who I am. And the guides operate as the guides. And while they're operating through me, and they're not, how can I say this? They're pretty quick to correct me and correct me publicly, if I am in the way, or if I am. See, I don't know. It doesn't occur to me at this level, because the idea at this level with the channeling is you can't try to channel. You're either doing it or you're not doing it. It's kind of like stepping under the shower head. Either you're wet, the water's on, or you're not. So once that's happening, I'm so busy with that's my job. Does that mean that I don't have a personality self, and I'm a curmudgeon, truthfully, in my private life, and I can be judgmental, and I can be anything that you can imagine. But I hope, truthfully, that I keep my work clear. I mean, to my credit, I was a classroom teacher for 25 years at New York University, NYU, and I ran a graduate program at a small college in Vermont as well. So I had, I think, a fair amount of experience with boundaries around those things, and hopefully learned. But my ego, as it relates to the work, I've never even really asked about it. People sometimes say, who've seen me, in workshop or read the book, say, well, your guides aren't being very nice to you and they're overriding you. And I go, well, actually, that's not it. Nothing makes me happier than if the guides say something like, Paul is interrupting and we will take his question later. I love that, because it reminds me that I'm not in charge.
Yeah.
It's like, okay, good, phew.
Yeah.
And it's actually often later, in a later book, that I understand what they had been talking about in a prior book. So there are people that are working with these teachings, and many of them now, who are having these very large experiences and may understand or be able to quote the texts in ways that I may never be able to. And I did a workshop recently, and somebody asked me a question about the books, and I said, I don't really know what they said. I don't remember what they were talking about. And she looked at me sort of, I wouldn't say she was horrified, but a little surprised. You said, you really do just take the dictation.
Yeah.
And I said, yeah, that's my job. And that doesn't mean that I'm not a student of the work, but it does mean that I'm not parading myself as the teacher of the work.
Sure. And I so appreciate that about you. You're what I would call the humbleness to know you're the pen that the author uses to write the words with. And I think that's phenomenal. And I think about my life, and sometimes I appreciate when I can live like an absolute idiot and get away with things, even though part of me knows, like, JP, you're just being defensive right now. You're being critical of others. You're trying to tear someone down. But it's like, nobody's watching. Nobody's correcting me. And when you're living like a curmudgeon, as you said, that's such harsh language, by the way. But when you're living like a curmudgeon, do the guides kind of do a kidney punch and say, Paul, shape up? Or can you get away with just being a messy human as much as you want?
I have free will. And if I want to, sit in my apartment and order pizzas, I can do that. If I want to say no to my life, I can do that. I've been known to do that, and I've been very fortunate, I think, that there have been people put in my life who remind me of my responsibility to my life, and and I'll say to my behavior. I mean, when you're a hermit, not a lot's happening anyway. But I used to say, I'm not the person you want standing behind you in a long line at the bank. You really don't want me there. And and I think that that's true some days. But I also think that finally, who I am inherently, means no harm. I think that that's part of who I am, truthfully, and even though I can get cranky and be a pain in the ass and complain about just about anything, I'm also when I say I'm a curmudgeon, that can just mean I'm cranky,
Mhm.
So yes, I'm allowed to do that. But the other thing is, I've really been given a set of tools with which to work, and I do work with them. And I remind myself too, even though it's not always convenient to what I want. I mean, the guides that I work with, sometimes people think that because I can tune in at this level, I'm getting guidance for myself all day long, and I'm not.
Yeah.
I have to ask. They don't interfere. And, the thing that my guides are very helpful with me is not making choices based in fear in the moment.
Yeah.
Is this a good thing to do? Should I do that? Should I talk to this one? Not wise is what I would hear. Not wise means it's still up to me, but it may not be the highest choice I could make.
Oh, that's cool. So your latest book, The Book of Freedom,
Uh-huh.
there's what for me is a very powerful line from the book. It says, "Freedom we suggest is what you come to when you stop pretending that you are not free." Why in the world do we pretend we're not free?
Well, we're taught this. I mean, my guides, if they come through, they may say it better than I can, but we're taught to. So we're living in a culture that tells us what beauty is, what success is, what we should aspire to, who is worthy of love and who is not. I mean, if you look at the way we treat people in our society, in our world, you have a fair indication of how we're taught.
Yeah.
And I think we're taught very poorly, but we're operating in collective constructs. And I think it's one of the things that, there are things, in the new age, you'll hear people say, well, you create your own reality. And, that man on the street who has no money, he's creating that. And my guides would say perhaps so, but he's also creating you the opportunity to help. So there's really nothing very self-serving, I think, about this teaching at that level, but we do have to understand that we're complicit to these collective constructs of agreement, and we're not free in them.
Mm.
Even the idea of what we're allowed. I mean, when I work now with people, I work, you can call it telepathically. I can tune into people, sort of feel what it feels like to be them and hear the other people in their lives. They call me a medium for the living. So if you still have a body, I may be able to hear you. Even if you're in a coma or have dementia, I can still access an aspect of you and articulate that. And I do that for people sometimes, in my work. Now, this isn't something that I was brought up to believe was possible.
Yeah.
But if I can do it, that simply means it can be done, because to be honest, I'm not that special. And, some of the best mediums I've ever met in my life are these older ladies sitting at their kitchen tables, in Rhode Island, reading for people. They're not out there trying to get a reality show. Do you know what I mean? They're doing their work and they're living their lives. These are things that are available to us, but we live in a shared construct that says you can't have them. I mean, I grew up in a home where I was told, well, stupid people believe in God,
Mm-hmm.
and, we went to therapy. We didn't go to church, I mean, that was sort of my childhood. And nothing wrong with therapy and nothing necessarily wrong with church. I actually still don't go. But the idea that these things were available was a leap for me. And because of who I am, and did not have the benefit or the challenge of any organized religion in my family, I was kind of open to what might be there beyond it, beyond that construct, which can also be limiting.
Yeah. So it almost seems like to me our freedom is always there and
Mhm.
always available, but much like the elephant that's has a leash on it. I don't know where you get elephant
Yeah.
leashes, but apparently they make them somewhere. And then there's just a flimsy stake in the ground, and the elephant believes, oh, I'm tethered to the ground, even though it's got the strength and the power to just bust out of the restraints anytime. So it sounds like to the degree that we pretend we're not free is the degree that we don't claim the freedom that's always available to us. Both, the collective beliefs that we soak in like a sponge, and then also would we be able to say the personal beliefs that we tell ourselves?
Well, the big lie, I suspect, may be that we are our personalities,
Yeah.
and that this is who we are, and this is kind of where it ends. And if that's the case, why not try to get more of everything that you can get while you're alive? Because at least you can have an experience of what you think of as success, or I think of as, this or that. It doesn't really matter. So the big limitation, I think, is that we are not what the guides I work with call the true self or the divine self, and that aspect of us isn't available and present and seeking to realize itself through us. But that comes at the cost of who and what we think we are. And who and what we think we are, in most cases, is dictated, I suspect, by what we've been taught to believe and expect. That's
Yeah.
it. So we don't look beyond the known. I mean, the guides have said, we're always ordering off of the menu of what we think is available to us. It doesn't occur to us to order something that's off the menu. And that means we're always claiming the known. And they've said, you're always dining on yesterday's leftovers, whether you know it or not. And they'll say, like, look around the room. And, and they'll say everything in the room that you're sitting in has been named by somebody who came before you. You know what a table is, you know what a chair is, what a roof is. All of these things are historical data. And everything they say that we're seeing now exists in multiple octaves, multiple realities, and we can actually begin to experience what exists in the higher octaves as we align to them.
Yeah. I've heard statistics around the idea that 90% of what we believe about ourselves, who we think we are, is programmed in us by the age of 7. Who knows if that's true? Yet, just taking that with a grain of salt, it's to me almost confusing to think like, okay, from a very early age, my belief, my sense of who I am, that seems like the most real thing in my reality, that's false. Yet the idea of liberation and getting more in touch with my true self and getting more clean with expressing my true self, that really sounds good intellectually. And it is. And at an embodied level, that scares the hell out of me.
Yeah.
Like that, I have to let who I think I am die.
Well, you're using the word die,
Yeah.
and that's not the word that the guides use. They use assumed. The small self is assumed by the true self or appropriated by. But, I'll say this, when I was in my early 30s, this is a while ago now, and, I was in a rough time, and I'm 99% sure I heard this in channel. It was when I was first opening up, and that I didn't read it someplace. But I heard, freedom will come when the throne relinquishes its king. And I thought, what does that mean? And I wrote it down, and I understand it now, which basically means who's sitting in the throne? Is it the personality self who wants things his way? See, my personality self thinks I'm what my mother said I was. I'm what happened to me when I was 9 years old. I'm what my ex said. I'm what's in my bank account. I'm what you think of me. Now, all of those things, they're only true at a certain level. It's not to deny what happened to me when I was a child or what my parents said about me. But if that's who I am, one of the examples they used once in a book was, he said, imagine that every job you ever had in your life had a little ID tag, and you walked around one day wearing all of those old ID tags at once. And then you're shocked that somebody's asking you to clean their hotel room. And you haven't been a chambermaid since you were 17 years old, that awful summer, after high school, whatever it is. But you see, that's kind of what we're doing. We're claiming a life through what we think we are based on what we were taught to believe, and the values as well that we are aligned to depending on when the hell we're born in the world,
Yeah.
So
to me, that means, who I think I am, that's the great king of my life. But for me, the invitation here is to realize who you are is greater than the king. You are the kingdom. And the sense of self who typically sits in the throne realize you can kind of kick him out. Maybe he's still part of the kingdom, yet who you are is so much greater than the king that you think you are.
I think the idea of the throne, relinquishing its king, giving up its king, is a little different than throwing it out, which is sort
Or
of violent.
assassinating.
Yeah, which is, but that's I don't hear it that way. And I'm not saying that I've embodied at this level. I can explain the teaching that I receive. I mean, the guides work. The guides say we're all radios, right? And we're always in a broadcast, and our consciousness is our broadcast. Our vibratory field is the broadcast. So we're always broadcasting. So if my broadcast is I'm a piece of crap and I deserve what comes to me, that's what I'm calling to myself. And at that level, that's the reality that I'm living in, or the world sucks and it's never going to get better here. And I'll continue to affirm that. When they teach with these things called energetic attunements, and they say that they're attuning the radios that we are to play the higher broadcast that's already available. And one of the claims they work with, I know who I am in truth, I know what I am in truth, I know how I serve in truth, they say is made by the true self, not the personality self. So my personality self thinks of myself in smaller ways. To align as the true self really does come at the cost of the old. And they teach the kingdom, and you invoked it, you mentioned it, and they say the kingdom is the awareness of the divine in all manifestation, but the one who expresses there is the one who is aligned to it, which is the true self, and that this can be done. So the attunements themselves are actually there, I suspect, and they're saying yes, to support us in this. Do you understand? Because my small personality self cannot divinize myself.
Yeah.
It's not possible. That would be the ego. To go back to your guru question, the moment I start thinking this is me, I'm sunk. And I doubt that I'll be hearing anything. Do you know what I mean? That's the challenge. My personality self may be flawed. And, it's not about making the small self perfect. It's about realizing the true self and releasing those things that may be, or at least accepting and then realigning those things that may be inhibiting the true self's expression.
I like that. And in aligning with the true self, how do we do that? I know you mentioned and you have attunements.
Yep.
So I'll just leave the big question on the table. How can people better align with their true selves?
The guys are saying claim it, choose it, know that it can be so, and know that it can be so. They're speaking. I should say, when I channel, I whisper the words as they come and then repeat them, and it's all messy and it doesn't sound very graceful. Choose, choose, choose. They're saying choose, choose, choose. But no, you can't choose, you won't. But if you don't know that you can choose it, you won't. You've been taught you can. And you've been taught that you can. You've been taught allowed. You've been taught that it's not allowed, that it cannot be so, that it cannot be so. And you will confirm that by your experience with small self mandate, because it is the small self's mandate that she be the ruler of the show, that she be the ruler of the show, the claim, I know who I am, the claim, I know who I am, the divine is you announcing itself, the divine is you announcing itself, I know what I am in ascension, I know what I am in manifestation, I know how I serve, expression is a claim that will invoke, is a claim that will invoke the higher alignment, the word as we teach it, the word as we teach, which is action form, which is the action of the creator, inform as who and what you are, as who and what you are can be aligned to as well, can be aligned to as well with these phrases, which are intonations, which are again intonations of truth. I am word through my body. I am word through my body. Word, I am word. Word, I am word. I am word through my vibration. Word, I am word. Word, I am word. I am word through my knowing of myself as word. Word, I am word. Word, I am word. These align the systems. These align the systems, again, through invocation or claim, again, through invocation or claim, to align to what is already so. You already are a divine being. You've been ignoring it. You've been ignoring it and taught to ignore it and keep ignoring it, and taught to ignore it and keep ignoring it and keep ignoring it. That is the world you live in. That is the world you live in. To be free of this. To be free of this is to claim your inheritance, is to claim your inheritance, your true inheritance, which in fact is the kingdom, which in fact is the kingdom, and it's here now, and it is here now as you align to it, as you align to it, period. And they're saying period.
Thank you, my friend. That's beautiful. And when I was listening to the Book of Mastery and some of the attunements that are in that, I know who I am. This is me overthinking it, yet I was noticing my intellectual brain saying like, I don't know who I am intellectually. Yet, would it be true the power of the attunement, it doesn't depend on some intellectual grasping?
Because you're not claiming it at the level of the small self. You see, the small self, if my small self wants to claim I know who I am, I'll claim my age, my gender, what I think about myself on this day. When I say those things, the guides say what is true is always true. You know, you hear people say, my truth is, and the guides say, no, that's not true. That's just your opinion.
Yeah.
You know, that's your opinion. What is true is always true. So the divine self is always true. And because the divine self, which is an aspect of you, knows who he is already, that is the aspect of the self that makes the claim, I know who I am. So you're not lying at that level. For this personality self to say, I am the divine self, that would be a lie. Do you understand that?
Yeah, I do. And I appreciate you spelling that out because, I when I first heard that in the Book of Master, I got a little hung up. It's like, well, I don't know. Am I just spiritually bypassing and pretending I know something when I don't and not being authentic? Thank you for that clarity. I appreciate it. A question for you or the guides or... In the path of awakening is specifically with healing. We have all of our past pain, wounding, traumas, some of them unresolved. How important is it, or is it not important, to go into the feelings and really look at and feel what's happened in the past?
I'm going to let them do this. I have my own opinion of what they might say, only enough to know what it is. They're saying only enough to know what it is. If you know what it is, if you know what it is, you don't have to express what you don't have to express through it to understand what a pain is. To understand what a pain is to experience the pain enough to understand it, enough to understand it, to be able to move the energy of what many of you do. What many of you do is stay in the old pain, wallow in it, say you're healing yourselves, and then say that you're healing yourselves. That tells no one. That heals no one to comprehend what happened. To comprehend what happened, to recognize your part in it, to recognize your part in it, or there's actions against you, or another's actions against you can be healing. But to stay there is to stay in recrimination. Is to stay in recrimination of others or self. So in order to move beyond this, you need to lift beyond these things. You need to lift beyond these things by knowing who and what you are without them, by knowing who and what you are without them. It is not pretending. It is not pretending the true self as you. The true self as you does not operate in fear, and has never been wounded, and has never been wounded. That does not the pain experience. That does not deny the pain experience, does not deny the pain you've experienced, but it does put you in a situation to reclaim the self, beyond what you thought you were, beyond what you thought you were, period. They're saying period. So I'll try to say this.
Sure.
When I work as an empath, which sometimes I'll step into somebody and I'll feel their pain, but I feel it enough to be able to articulate what it is, but I don't stay there. That doesn't help them at all for me to take their stuff on. But if I can't give myself the opportunity to feel it, I'm not going to know what it is. To pretend it's not there, which would be bypassing, would be something else. Well, your divine self is fine anyway, so just be the divine self. Well, I get that at a certain level, but you're not denying someone's experience here. The guides say, we're participatory to all of our creations and accountable to them as well. So when I was studying healing back in my early 30s, one of the things we used to do was we used to pull out the blockage by hand, which was kind of amazing because you could feel it. So for example, if you've got somebody and I do this in my group sometimes, but if you've got somebody whose throat is just shut down, and the throat sort of is the bottleneck between the heart and the mind, you can move the energy out of them, and it's old stuff and it's palpable. But what you're releasing is what's been held, that's been denied. To pretend it's not there doesn't do anything. Do you understand this?
Yeah.
And if somebody's going to release their stuff, it's pretty much guaranteed that they're going to have to touch into it at some level. That doesn't have to mean relive it in its entirety, because that is essentially living in an idea of the past.
Yeah, I think I've oscillated to both sides of that coin. I think up until my early 20s, I was just very emotionally disconnected. And, I hadn't cried for 6 or 8 years, and thinking like, that makes me strong, doesn't it?
Yeah.
But then I had, at one level, I'd call it an awakening with a powerful mentor. And so I cried for the first time in a while. And then, so I was extremely disconnected. And then maybe pendulum swinging to the other side of the coin, I started, shadow work. This is awesome. And I think I've started to over glorify being in the swamp and, kind of justifying it with all the things like, dude, I'm a warrior consciousness and you got to feel it to heal it and all the things that rhyme. So I just mindlessly believe my interpretation of them is true. And then, now what I'm kind of sitting with recently, trying to rethink all my old thinking. And I love what you said. It helps me do that, after a while, you're victimizing yourself. You're sitting in the pain unnecessarily, and maybe getting some self-identity out of the pain or the past wounding, rather than actually processing it and feeling it once you already know it's there.
I think the challenge is, you see, the guides that I work with say we all work with these little frames, and the frame is a construct. So if my frame is, and here's just a bad example. I always date jerks. I'm calling every jerk to me in that choice. So I'm going to ask that can be turned off. That would be helpful to me, just because I can't hear. I always say jerks. So if the construct is, I'm always going to suffer, I'm affirming that, or my life is always going to be hard. It's not to say that my life was not easy. I didn't come to any of this work because things were going so terribly well. It wasn't like a flower unfolding gracefully. It was a bit more like falling apart and throwing up over everything and then having to clean it up, and it still is that way sometimes for me. And I think people assume that given what I do, it should be other. And it's a lot easier than it was, truthfully, a lot easier. But it's because I think I'm less invested in poking the wound. You know what I mean? Because a wound doesn't get to heal when it's always being prodded.
Yeah. Thank you for that, my friend. Something I think a thread that permeates all the pieces of your work that I've seen, and I think certainly the new book, the Book of Freedom, is this call to surrender, living a life with the doctrine of control versus elevating yourself to live in more of a posture of surrender. And there's a line from the Book of Freedom, just act like I'm literate and can read it here. It says, to be fully realized as the true self, the divine as what you are, requires one thing: to surrender to what you have always been at the cost of the known. That, I could sit with that for a few hours and still get dizzy about the line, the cost of the known. We've talked about going beyond who you think you are. And I would dare say, maybe we're not who we think we are. Maybe we're not even who we want to be. But who we are is this bigger mystery that's trying to emerge through us. So going beyond that known into this place of surrender, for me, is fascinating, very ungratifying to my ego. My ego says, let's talk about control and how we can get more of that. But I think true power is through surrender. And I think you speak about that and write about that beautifully.
Well, I don't speak about anything much, and I don't write any of it. I mean, all of the stuff you're quoting is the guides speaking through me, and I'm reseated during that. I'm in like the back seat of the car while this stuff is happening. I'm listening to it, but I'm hearing it and perhaps responding to it similarly to you, but you're a little more present with it because your response is immediate, and I'm the one, unfortunately, having to give it voice.
Yeah.
You see? So the idea of surrender, which they continue to talk about, and they don't talk about, they said in the most recent book, the one that they just finished dictation on 2-3 weeks ago, they talk about humility and they say, to say, I don't know and I am willing to learn is enough sometimes. You don't have to be bludgeoned by your experience to surrender something. And I have a will that wants his way still and will, do all that stuff. And I am challenged by the ramifications still of it, as I continue to be, as I probably always will be, unless I begin to move beyond some of this. I don't know if I answered your question, because I digressed into the authorship question, which always seems to happen, because I don't want people to think that I know more than I do.
Sure.
I can articulate up to a point what comes through me. I can try to explain it, but my understanding is still experiential. And some of it's just because I've heard this stuff enough, because they say many of the things again and again when they talk.
Yeah. And I think all of that speaks to my experience of how you surrender, how you claim like these aren't my words. I'm reporting them. And with surrender, something I get curious about, what happens to our free will when we're surrendered, and do we even have free will? And I know some get a little philosophical and wonder, like, in the first place, do we have free will, or is it just all destiny? Everything's preordained, and here we are, these little ego pods running along with the illusion that we have some level of control. So I'm curious, what does happen to our free will when we're surrendering?
Well, they talk about alignment of the will, and that the will itself can be seen as an expression of the divine, as opposed to something separate from it. So if everything is an expression of the divine, including your personality and the blister on your foot and your rotten ex-relationship and whatever that stuff is, if God can't be excluded from any equation, if in fact there is something you want to call the divine or God or source or whatever, it's got to be everything. It can't just be the things you think and approve of on that day, which is unfortunately what people like to do. This is holy and that's not, and we'll leave it at that. So the idea of will, if the will itself is an aspect of the divine, then the will itself can be appropriated by the divine. Now, I have free will, and I've often said this, my guides don't interrupt. They really don't. And I've often said, if I want to cross the street into traffic, head-on traffic, I can do that. If I ask them and I say, is this a good time to cross the street? They might say, not wise, which means I have choice. You want to bump yourself off, you can go do that. You do have free will. When they talk about will, they talk about the small self-will, which is the personality self. This is what I should. And the true self's will, this is which is operating, I guess. I don't have a quote for that one. We do. They're saying we do. This is the higher choice. This is the higher choice. If you think about it, this is them. If you think about it in higher and lower choice, and lower choice is really very easy. It's really very easy. The low choice is not necessarily bad. The low choice is not necessarily bad. You will learn through every choice you make. You will learn through every choice you make, including walking into a car, You may learn not to do that again. You may learn not to to do that again. That may be the lesson there. That may be the lesson there. The higher choice may be, wait for the light to turn blue, wait for the light to turn blue, and then you may walk, and then you may walk. They are both choices. They are both choices. To move to the higher, is to understand the lower, is to understand the lower as an opportunity, may be chosen that may not be chosen. To think that the higher will is boring, or not what you would want, is a wonderful reason to ignore it, Now you may speak. They're saying to me, now you may speak. So the way I've understood this a little bit is, the old teaching of, thy will, not mine be done, which is separation. In 12-step land, it's the third step is made a choice to turn our will and our lives over to the care of God as we understand God. Now, my thinking, when I first heard those things was, well, my will must be bad. There must be something very wrong with my will, so we're going to give it to somebody else because I'm not capable of handling it. And when the guides teach, they actually require permission from their students. I mean, in the books, they say, make the choice. We can only take you where you're willing to go.
Yeah.
And the act of will and the act of agreement is a choice made in will. So the will can be used, I think, in a wonderfully high way. There's nothing wrong with it. For me, the new idea is that the will can be an expression of the divine, that it has to be because it can't be excluded from it. Sort of solves that dilemma a little bit.
Sure, it makes sense. And that brings up for me something I think a lot of people spend a lot of life energy on is trying to get what they want.
Yeah.
And I think a question begs to be asked of what part of you is wanting what you want. And, if we were to make things simple, small self and big self or divine self, I would dare say when I've gone through phases in my life of really being run by my small self, probably am now, even though I pretend I'm not, but even being run by my small self while really like spiritualizing it all. So I'd have my vision board and it's like, here's all the things I want. And here's the justifications. Like, that's abundance. It's not just, I want a bunch of money. That's abundance, bro. And universe living through me. That's like, okay, that's what my small self wants.
Yeah.
Maybe I don't have to call that bad, but maybe I can be aware to say, oh, that want was coming from my small self and not vision boarded it. But then there's listening to what wants to live through me. Maybe what does my divine self want? And there's a calibration that I think about of how can I get my small self to want what my big self wants? And I'll just sort of end that curiosity there. How can we get our small self to align and want what the big self wants?
It's a really interesting question. I've never asked it because I understand what you were saying earlier. When the guides have often said, there's nothing wrong with a house on the hill. Somebody gets to live there, but why do you want it? So if you want it to be the envy of your neighbors, you're creating in fear.
Yeah.
If you want it so that everybody's going to think you're great, you're creating in fear. So let me see. So is the question, how do you teach the divine self to want what the divine self
I would
wants?
say, how do you teach the small self to want what the divine
They're
self
saying
wants?
the small self will not be taught. She can't be taught. She can't be taught. She thinks she is separate from the divine self. She thinks she is separate. He thinks he is separate. He thinks he is separate from the divine self, from the divine self. So this is about alignment. So this is about alignment, aligning to the higher, aligning to the higher. Now the higher doesn't exclude the things you want. Now the higher doesn't exclude the things you think you want. Everything may be chosen. Everything may be chosen at any level. At any level, you are back to thinking. You are back to thinking that you're about to enter the monastery, that you are about to enter the monastery where there will be no partner for you, where there will be no partner for you, or no good food, and the real life happens beyond its walls. And the real life happens beyond its walls. The divine is in all things. The divine is in all things. Every meal you eat, every meal you meet, every stranger you say hello to, every stranger you say hello to. The world is yours. The world is yours at this level, and you may choose to learn through. And any anything may be chosen and learned through. The true self will not call to you. The true self will not call to you what is not for your benefit, what is not for your benefit. If you look at that simply, if you look at it that simply, means the reason here, you'll begin to understand the reasoning here. The reasoning here, the true self knows. The true self knows what you need and seeks your brilliance, your true expression, regardless of what you think of it, regardless of what you think of it. Many of you believe that what the true self wants for you, that what the true self wants for you is in opposition to what you want as a small self. Well, this may be true. I want to be the best one here. I want to be the best one here, or the worst one here, or the worst one here would be a claim of the small self, would be a claim of the small self. The true self just wants to be. The true self just wants to be in her way, in her way, in his way, as best he can. Do you understand that? Do you understand that? He is not measuring himself. He is not measuring himself upon the scale that the culture you live in would have you do, that the culture you live in would have you do. He simply is. And because he is, he chooses in accordance. He chooses in accordance with his true requirements, period. And they're saying period.
Yeah. Thank you. Something I find like beautiful about the teachings, and also scary at the same time, is how the guides seem to me to be so okay with us learning through mistakes, us choosing, well, if I want the house on the hill to be more significant than the neighbor, then you can do that. You'll experience all there is to it, lessons, consequences. What we judge to be positive and negative. And it's almost like that scares me. Like part of me would want the guides like, no, come on, intervene if I'm about to step into the traffic. And at the same time, it almost speaks to true freedom.
When I had a list of things in my life that I had to have achieved by the time I was 25 to be okay in the world. And I got the whole list, and it was a flashy list. I really was, and I got it, and I wasn't okay. That was my lesson. I wasn't okay. I was actually sort of falling apart in a hotel room in St. Paul, the Gopher Campus Motor Lodge, with a giant gopher on a spigot outside my window, going, "What the hell?"
At the good one.
You know you're at the good one when there's a gopher on a spigot, and I was like, So what I thought was going to save me didn't, and I learned through that. And I don't deny the good that was in my life, or perhaps what I have achieved and the benefits of that too to my learning. I learned through everything. I mean, the guides say if we want to learn through blowing ourselves up, we can do that too. That's up to us. But there are other choices to be made. So I don't think that they make us wrong. And I think to make us wrong perhaps would be not to love us. I mean, they're putting up with me. You know what I mean? And I'm not the best articulation of channeling. The way I channel is weird, and there's whispering. It's not graceful. I'm not wearing white. If I could still
I'm a little
smoke,
offended about that, by the way.
If I could still smoke, I would be smoking as much as I used to. This is just who I am. I'm not a perfect man as a man, but I do feel. And I see this when they work with people. I really do see this. Because I can be thinking, oh my God, this person is so full of crap. And the guides come through and they just know who that person is. And they love them anyway. And the idea of loving anyway is really one of the big lessons. I don't like what you do, but I love you anyway. And that changes the whole fabric of the experience. And I think they do.
It's almost, if we didn't know any better, that's actual love. And that reminds me of very loving parents who they don't make their child wrong if they spill the milk on the table. They love them anyway. They don't shame them for it. So the mistakes are allowed while they're being loved anyway. And I think when we come to point where we're at in life where like, oh, now spilling the milk on the table as a collective might be we blow up the world, yet they will love us anyway. And that's a big glass of milk to
Yeah.
spill, a little scarier than a smaller glass, yet I guess we're loved enough anyway that we can do that.
I think we have free will. I don't get that we're going to be doing that. I mean, what the guides are teaching is that not only do we not have to, the key is to stop claiming separation.
Yeah.
It's that simple, And they say, "What you damns you back." It can't be easier, That's so easy.
Yeah.
What you bless blesses you. What you witness is divine. Actually, and this is a really trippy thing that they do in the book, and it's happening. When the guides teach, they're actually having people focus on someone, the body of the person before them, and claiming the divine as form. And that's the claim. I know what you are in truth. And what'll happen is you literally can feel the energetic field of the person coming back to you in acknowledgement. And it's like, what? And what the guides say, well, this is the divine sort of in response to its claim. They say the divine is inherent in all manifestation. And the job of the one who has come at this level is to see it, to know it, to claim it. And then by doing that, you're lifting the world to its potential, to its realization.
I love that. Well, Paul, is a way of getting my heart rate up, giving me a little cardiovascular exercise / nervousness. Before we jumped on air, you mentioned the idea of doing a reading for me. Would that be an appropriate time now?
What I would do is I would tune into you and see if I could feel and hear you. And if and I'll tell you what I get. I mean, that would be the extent of it. I'm not a fortune teller. That's not what I do. Thank God. But what I do is tune into people. I usually do it by name, and I call it stepping into people. So if I can, step into you, I'll be able to feel you, and I can step into your relationships or the people in your lives as life as well. So, can I have your full name? Is that okay?
Sure, Jonathan Patrick Sears.
Let me see if I can get you first. You come through tight, which is interesting. So, I'm literally clutching my butt. And you actually come through saying, I'm very aware of how I'm seen. And you're saying too aware. And there's a part of you that actually wants this to leave. And the funny thing is, when I tune into you, it's kind of like you're in a pod, like a pea in a pod, and the pod itself is a constriction. The pod is a constriction. So you're actually wanting and really ready to sort of break out. You're going to have to. I actually just heard you're going to have to, because this is saying this. They're saying this could be stunting your own growth by not doing that. So I'm going to go, why? This just simply has to do with wanting to be seen the way you think you should, and nothing more. I mean, you're in a profession where people are seeing you, so I understand that. That's not the issue. They're saying that's not the issue. That's persona. That's persona. If you want a persona on stage, you can have it. If you want a persona on stage, you can have it and release it, but then release, be the soft man you are, and then be the soft man you are. The soft man is who wants to come forth. The soft man who wants to come forth. He's only malleable. They're saying he is not only malleable to experience, he is enriched by it. He is enriched by it. So, I mean, I don't see this as a big deal. So I'm going to step in a different one. Let's see if I can hear you about this. This is what I hear. So fuck everybody. I don't care what people think of me. But I do. But it's like, but I do. You know what I mean? But I do. But I do.
Yeah.
So you're still looking. They're saying when you understand that nobody decides about you, but you, this will be over. This will be over. Mm-hmm. And they're saying you still think people are deciding for you. And they're not. You're deciding, empowering them. And this is actually about empowering others. And some of these are people that you're putting above you. Do you understand this? Because this means above. I mean, if you want me to tune into anybody around this, I can and see what I get. Who would you like to know about?
So in terms of who I might be putting above me?
Yeah.
Yeah, one of my original mentors comes to my mind, a very dear person. I love him to death, but John McMullen.
I don't know who he is, so
Sure.
I'm going to step in and see what I get. Well, he comes through doing this with a bit of a smirk. He's living, yes?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Now, this doesn't necessarily, you see, this is happening playfully,
Sure.
but it's also real. And this is boundary, usually. It doesn't really mean screw you, the middle finger. It means a bit of a boundary. What do you do next? But I go to this person, I want to go, what are you going to do next? Now, he does come through as if to say, I'm going to decide about you. Now, I feel when I do this, I feel like I've been given the authority to do this. Do you understand that? So it's not like I'm doing anything negative. Now, I don't know what the relationship here is. I'm going to go from you to him now. You come through like this. Tell me I'm doing it right.
Yeah.
I want to be told I'm doing it right. What I actually get from this person is a no, but it's not a no that you're not doing it right. It's a bit more of a no, like I'm not going to tell you anymore. You have to do it yourself. And this is about you growing up. Do you understand that? Like if you don't, you're not going to grow up. You need to grow up. And there's a bit of you need that. And what I'm hearing from this one is to become the man you want to be. So I'm going to go to you in response to that. You say, who I think I am is going to have to change, and I don't want that. And I want to be told that I'm doing it right no matter what I do. And you're using that in order to be able to move yourself forward. Do you understand this? I mean, that's the energy that is sort of letting you, sort of steering you. Because when you're being steered still, but you're looking behind yourself to make sure you're doing it right. In fact, better to say it this way. They're saying better to say it this way. You're really not being steered externally. You're really not, but you're looking behind you still for that approval and acknowledgement and push. Now, I'm going to ask, are there specific questions around this relationship? Because that was the tune into the dynamic.
Yeah. I think with that relationship, no specific questions. I mean, he's a dear friend. I love him to death. And everything you said from his perspective and mine, that resonates as true.
Good.
Yeah.
Anybody else?
Yeah. What about my wife?
Well, she's in the studio, so I'm going to have to, we're going to have to do this. We can do this.
Let's go there. Brother.
All right. So I mean, I don't know. I just met you this morning. So let me see if I can do this. He is coming through, agreeing. How about that? What do you think of that? Okay. So I'm going to go from her to you. A little different. The energy here is a bit more of why don't you do what I want? And then I look straight at you. It's my turn. And there's behind this is a little bit of it's my turn. My turn. And when I say that, I'm not forcing anything. I'm asking for acknowledgement of my need. And I actually hear I'm not replaceable, nor will I be. And when I don't feel about this as about replaceable from other people, I actually feel about things. I want to say I'm more important than things. I also want to say I'm more important than what you think you want. And I hear, and none of this is being said, by the way, in an adversarial way. It's a little bit more like petition energy. And I'm not looking at your wife because I don't want to hear what I'm getting at. Now I'm going to go from you to Amber. You come through saying, I don't want you to know what I'm really feeling all the time. I need privacy. That's how I get my privacy. I keep a little to myself. It's not about you. It's about privacy. So this is the equivalent of the kid, like the kid that keeps the clubhouse in the backyard with no girls allowed. You know what I mean? I'm going to go there and shut the door and like read my comics. And she's like, what the, and I hear you do this because And you're doing this, I hear, because you want something that you can have with her,
Mm.
and that this is actually okay. And there's a difference between pushing her aside and claiming something for yourself.
Mm.
And what's private is private and can still be, and can still be. It's not exclusionary. And they're talking about the difference between something being private and something being exclusionary. And that's a misunderstanding. Do you understand this at all? I don't know, but this is what I'm getting. It's not exclusionary. It's private. So I'm going to go back to Amber for this. Why don't we talk about it the way I think we should, is what I'm hearing now. I know more than you think. And she also says to you, I know more than you think. There is a little bit of a sense, interestingly enough, of I know what's going on here. Now, I don't know. I have no idea what any of this is about, nor will you. And I just heard it, nor will you. So they're not going to give me stuff. But the good news is the game is on. The game is on, and it's being played in love, and it's being played in love. So do you understand this? It's just a game. This is just a game. This back and forth, the landscape that the game is played in. The landscape that the game is played in is in love, and that's what you must understand and know. And that's what you must understand and know. Questions. You're saying questions. Any questions about this?
Yeah, here's a question. I mean, I'm processing a lot, and that like strikes me meaningfully. I appreciate all of that. The question that comes to me is, how can I show up more fully in my relationship with Amber? Of course, while maintaining my sovereignty of myself, my mission.
By trusting her to be herself and let her needs be known as they are known, and not perceiving them as, I hear, accosting you. And there is a sense that you may, or that you do. And the idea here is something that something's going to be wanted from me that I can't give.
Yeah.
That's all. It's not about not wanting to have. It's about not having it to give, or it being taken from you before you're prepared to give. Father, this stuff connects to your father, by the way. More so, I would have thought mother, father. I hear father in a big way. Protect what you have. The idea comes of the idea protect what you have in some way at this level, and that needs to happen. It's almost like I feel you like agreeing to an idea, and agreeing to an idea that isn't necessarily that accurate, and playing that out. So let me see if there's anything else on what you can do. I need to understand that I'm learning through this, and I don't have to do it right. I mean, that's the other piece to it. Okay.
Yeah.
Anything else?
May I throw one more question at you?
Yeah.
On a professional front, if I can categorize here, is there anything I'm being called to do that I'm not hearing and listening and taking action on?
Yeah, I hear that you don't have to compete with other people. That's the biggest thing. You're really on your own landscape. You really are. And everybody else is kind of an idea. And what they do is what they do. There's really no competition. And I hear that you actually assume competition because you've been taught that. It's really not so. And it's really not so. And I actually think that the minute you let that go, it's kind of like you just lift. You lift in visibility, because you see what's happening is you're not being pulled down by your watchfulness of other people's stuff and how they're being seen. Because right now, I feel you kind of going up and down, like you're on a trampoline around this thing, like high and low, high and low, high and low. And what you want to do is land on the higher platform. Do you understand that?
Yeah.
And I hear the moment you understand that you're not competing with others, that's so. The funny thing is, you actually know this intrinsically. The challenge with it is that some of this is habit. And it's kind of like, getting bubble gum on your shoe. Do you know what I mean? It's sticky stuff.
Um,
And the problem is that everybody wants to play the game. Everybody's doing it. So you do it. And it's not a good game. It's just not a good game. They're saying enjoy everybody else's work. Trust yourself to do your own. No issue there. And there's no issue there.
Yeah.
So that was what they came for. There may be other stuff, but that's what they started with.
Thank you. I think what you've reported to me in the past 10 minutes or so, inside it feels like an avalanche. Like, whoa, you've touched on bullseyes for me.
Oh, good.
And my personally and professionally, the big time, the part of like, I don't give a fuck what everybody's thinking, but I really do. And I think I don't give a fuck what people is thinking. I sometimes play that facade as a way of like really trying to manipulate their thinking. Like I'm the guy who doesn't give a shit what you think, because I really give a shit about what you think. And I think both in my relationship with Amber and in the outside world and always begging for approval. And I think your message, don't compete with other people, is a invitation to hopefully break some of that chain, maybe break the chain.
I hear it's easily done. It's a choice. It's a choice. It's also a detachment from result. And they're inviting you. I mean, there's a little bit of an eye roll with this. And it's just like, stop focusing on result. It's kind of like, in the old days, like, before you were born and when I was very, very small, they used to have the applause meter, Get rid of the applause meter. You know what I mean? It's like, it's an idea. It's the entertainment. It's just not real. I don't know what anybody else who's channeling is doing. I actually don't watch any of them. I don't read their stuff. I don't even want to know, And that's how I manage it, which is just by ignoring it. In your case, you have much more to give when you're not looking at others. You have much more to give when you're not looking at others to sort of give it back to you. That's all. Okay.
That makes sense. Thank you, my friend. Physically, I just want to share, when you began the reading, like I feel like a vibration outside of me. I'm not sure if that's me, your energy field, but all I can report is there's something that feels very real. Yeah. And what you've shared with me and reported, it intellectually strikes me as like, yeah, that's shit that I'm either been working on or stuff that I know is there that I need to work on. So yeah, this feels like a lot of clarity and truth and in a palpable sense of power.
Good. I'm glad to be of help.
Yeah. Appreciate you, my friend.
And you.
And before we close, land this mothership, could I ask a couple, now they almost seem like more superficial questions, sure, but a little bit more of a global sense. Would that be okay with you?
Do your best. Yeah, but don't always answer them, but we'll see.
Sure,
yeah.
Sure. I'm not sure if the guides know who our president is now. But I'm curious because I see our nation and maybe even the world divided in ways that I haven't witnessed in my lifetime. So I'm curious, what is the purpose of Donald Trump being our president from the higher perspective?
I'm going to see if I can get anything. We would like to say one thing. We would like to say one thing. It's certainly not. We think it's certainly not what you think. Even your idea of what could be healed through this, even your idea of what could be healed through this, the awakening of the masses to justice, or requirements for change, which could be so, are not the reason, In some ways, what you have chosen as a country, is to re-identify yourselves, is to re-identify yourselves as what you have always been, as what you have always been. The idea of peace in this country has been camouflage for what is rife For what is rife beneath the surface, and what is beneath the surface, and what is beneath the surface is now on the surface, is now on the surface, and will be contended with, and will be contended with in a national frontier, first, and then in an international one, because you cannot contain this, In other words, the blanket has been pulled back. The blanket has been pulled back to reveal the bugs in the bed, and you must contain it, and do what you can, to realize how you have been with each other, throughout this country's history, You've been dominating other countries. You have been dominating other countries. You have been claiming your independence. At the cost of others' well-being, This is permission now. To re-know who you are, as a country, and claim your sovereignty, sovereignty beyond this current situation, The man you know of as a president, is not just a symbol, He is the idea of who you have been. He is the idea of who you have been in many ways, outpictured, to be seen, comprehended, and re-understood, for this country to move to a new place, without fear or recrimination, to decide that another is worthy, and one is not, to claim victory, while you stand over the body of the one who has suffered, has never been in truth, the word of truth. The word of truth, the vibration of truth, is on this plane now, and all that has been buried, is being seen, resurrected, to be reknown, and consequently lifted to a higher octave, This is not a bad thing. But there is no comfort in it. To the small self, who wants things as he thought they were, Period. They're saying period.
That's a wow. That's a big wow. Thank you, my friend. Well, are there any last messages from Paul, the personality, or the guides that you wish the world to hear?
I'm going to go to the. I'm just like, did they really just talk about this? Because they don't talk about politics, and they don't talk about the world stage. They talk about humanity, and they've said for some time, and they said this in the Book of Truth, which I think predated Trump. Actually, there's a video of a channeling that I did 2 or 3 days before the last election that was filmed in Madison. It's up online. And the guides called it Great Change. And they said, what you're about to have, they said, you think your idea of choice is, I'll have the cream or the milk in my tea. And they said, this is what's going to happen when the table is turned over. Mm-hmm. That's what you're about to experience. And so I'm going to see what they would like to say. We'd like to say one thing. We would like to say one thing. All is well. All is well. Whether or not you know it, in the higher octave, things are not just well. Things are not just well, but perfect. Visit us there, and know yourself, as worthy of it, period. And they're saying period.
Yeah. Well, Paul, thank you for this conversation, the personal work, helping make the kingdom of thyself more accessible to everybody through the writing that comes through you, the spoken word that comes through you, the energy field that comes through you. I appreciate you as a man and as a messenger.
Thank you. Thank you very much. It was Absolutely. A pleasure.
And Paul, the book, the new book, The Book of Freedom, it's a good time to pre-order that baby now. Is Amazon the best place?
Amazon, IndieBound, Barnes & Noble. You can get it at all the booksellers on pre-order, yes.
Wonderful. And after people grab the book, best place for people to find you online?
Is my website. It's paulselig.com, PaulSelig.
And how do you spell com?
How do I spell C-O-M?
Okay, I just want to double check, make sure there weren't like multidimensionality in this spelling.
There probably are, but I don't know them.
Paul, thank you for being you, brother.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you for journeying with me and Paul Selig for episode 4 of my podcast. Now, real quick, I just want to give a big thank you to Aubrey Marcus and his company On It for having Paul and myself into their podcast studio to record this podcast. It's a beautiful facility. Aubrey's awesome. Check out onit.com. I really appreciate Aubrey and On It for hosting Paul and I for this podcast, making the video possible. Hey, and on that note, I'd be honored if you subscribe to my podcast. It's on iTunes and all the places where you hunt and gather your podcasts. Just search the Awaken with JP Sears show and it'll come right up. And also giving you a quick view into the future. At some point, I'd love to have all my podcast episodes broadcast on YouTube as well. It's not happening right now. It's just only a few special occasions right now. But once my podcast is self-funding and I can have the video guy and all the stuff that goes into creating good quality video podcasts, then I'll do that. But for now, please check out my podcast on iTunes and all the places. Subscribe. And I appreciate you being a viewer of my channel. I really do. And I hope you had a near overdose of weirdness in this podcast. And again, I want to thank my beautiful, amazing guest, Paul Selig, for being on with me. And thank you for being on with us. Talk to you soon.